Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. As always, I cannot wait to introduce our guest to you today. Before I do, I want to thank some people that we always thank. We want to thank brassandwinds.com. Brass and Winds have always been there for us when we need instruments for our school here at the Willow. If you're interested in purchasing a brass or wind instrument, we highly recommend you check out Mighty Quinn Brass and Winds. Welcome to my musical mind, Truer MU, the truth about music, where you can learn just about anything you want to know about music and hopefully more. We like for our subscribers to get a chance to go a little deeper into the subject. And to that end, I'd like to introduce our guest to you today. The story about our guest today, often I know my guests ahead of time. Occasionally, I seek them out. I say, this person seems interesting. In this case, our guest was recommended to me by someone we know. Our drum instructor here at the Willow School, Mr. Brian Bearzu, said, "You've got to interview this guy. He's really amazing." And I said, okay. And as I tried to do some research on this gentleman, I found it was very difficult. There's not much about him on the internet. So you and I will be getting to know him at the same time. But I do know this much about Jerry Fields. Jerry Fields is the percussionist and music director of the Afro-Cuban jazz ensemble Vecinos del Mundo, Neighbors of the World. Known as the premier Latin jazz ensemble in the Southeast U.S., Vecinos del Mundo has shared the stage with Latin jazz giants Tito Puente, Pancho Sanchez, and Eddie Palmieri. Jerry Fields, welcome to our show.
Welcome, Adam. Thank you so much for having me.
It is my pleasure. It's a delight to meet you.
Well, ask away, and I can fill you in with some of the bio about my past, but why don't we go ahead and roll and see how it goes?
Sounds good to me. Why don't we start by you telling me, I know you are a percussionist and a drummer. What instruments, can you give us a more full accounting of the instruments that you play?
Sure. Originally, I started out as drum set, and I was touring the States in the early 70s with a band called the Hampton Band. We had a double album called Music to Eat, played the Fillmore with Frank Zappa, all kinds of great shows. Then I actually played vibes and bells, orchestra bells in that band. I studied with Jack Bell from the Atlanta Symphony. I was always jealous of horn players. I don't have a lot of drumming in my house. It's singers and saxophone, trumpet players. So I really got into that. Tabla is another instrument that I was introduced to, I would say, karmically. I mean, I didn't seek it out, but I hung out and studied with Colin Walcott from the band Oregon. And actually, he's deceased now, and played with Glenn Moore, the bass player, and Paul McCandless. Studied with Vidal Roy in New York when I was up there playing a Greek gig. I'm a Yotis, love Greek music, Greek dancing. And then I decided late in life, because I had students, I was teaching drum set and all that I would get a music degree as an adult. Wow. So I would know what the audition process was for them. So then I went into orchestral percussion because I already could play drum set. So I didn't do excerpts because I wasn't going to try to be with a symphony. But what I did was I graduated summa cum laude in percussion performance from Kennesaw. But through all of the interim, I had studied with Jack Bell, who's still alive. I studied with Mark Jancic privately on symphony, Billy Wilder from the symphony. Got my degree, and then went to Princeton and studied with Nancy Zeltzman. And I also went to Ithaca and studied with Gordon Stout. And these are like two giants of the marimba, because I wanted to get like a bigger view than Atlanta, right? So I got into the whole orchestral thing, timpani, of course, with Mark. So basically, you can see I do all the orchestral percussion, Afro-Cuban percussion, conga, timbali, tabla. It's just such a wonderful instrument. Yeah, and then of course cajon through flamenco. I actually taught flamenco to dancers, because I'm like, what's with these people? It's all, it's either twos or threes. You're either going to do a punta, a golpe, a planta, or a tacon. So I'm like, but they don't know how the rhythms work. They learn a routine. So I actually did that as well, and actually taught at an after-school program for girls. And I'm going to New York to see some, colleagues play. I'm trying to get back out there, so to speak. So I pretty much do it all. That's about it. I don't play any Tubian music yet, but the most thing is uh, tabla now, and I've had some eye problems, so I don't do much legit work. So if it's something I can touch or drum sets like Second Nature, and I put it on the iPad, I'm good to go.
Yeah.
So
I apologize for
that's
wasting
it.
your time. I should have just asked you what you don't play.
I also am. I have an endorsement with Ace Hardware because I have a whole. I have a whole set of galvanic drums. When I used to play with the late Bronze Age, it's all garbage cans and paint buckets on stands, and used to do feedback. So if it can be shaken, struck, or caressed to produce sound, I pretty much play it.
That's astounding. Well, you've actually given us an encapsulation of your life in describing what you play. Let's get into a little more detail. Tell us
Sure.
how you got here. Let's start with your childhood. I mean, were you one of those kids who used to bang on pots and pans, or did it come later?
I think I probably did, and also played with detergent and things under the sink that I shouldn't have. But my father, and I'll probably get emotional. He was a very natural drummer, and my two earliest child memories. We were living in barracks. We were poor. It was him lifting weights, his breathing, and wailing like Gene Krupa. And us kids, I'm talking about first grade, and all would be outside the window, boom, 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 right? So that kind of stuck with me. My dad gave that up, which was probably, I mean, he died young. He should have kept doing it. So at one point, I asked my father, I think I was maybe 10, hey, dad, can you show me how to play the drums? He said, no, it's no kind of a life for a family. Well, I'm like, I don't know. I'm not even mature yet. I haven't hit puberty, dad. So I learned on my own. I started playing in a band in Fort Lauderdale. And then I wound up, my father came up here to find jobs, and I started playing in black clubs. And by the time my father and I got back together again, I wasn't the kid anymore. And when I moved to Atlanta, I played the first disco in Atlanta called the Simpson Scene. It was a very rough place, held a guy's gun when he was shot to death, played to a jukebox, had a DJ. It was really stabbings. It was great. I became numb to it, taking notos. They actually closed us down, but there's these great after hour clubs. So I was kind of, no, I wasn't kind of, I was groomed and had my butt kicked by elders. So I learned on the stand. There was no ghost notes, transcriptions. Should it be back to me this in parentheses? I mean, it's like, yo, you ain't doing you played, they kicked you off the stand. I remember I used to play with this group, Billy Mitchell. He's still alive when I'd fill in for a dear friend of mine, Al Nicholson. And I remember one day that the alto player said, hey, man, just keep the one in your pocket. We know where one is. So I had these wonderful experiences in high school, which was kind of rough because I'm trying to go to play with I heard Jack McDuff with George Benson at Pascal's La Carousel, Marion Brown. Him and I jammed in my garage apartment. So there was a living environment from which to learn. So that's how I got into it.
Well, how far are we from Colonel Bruce Hampton at this point?
That's funny because I was in high school here before Bruce was in the military. He was just Bruce. He's
Right.
actually working at Peterson's Gulf Station on Chambly Tucker Road.
Uh-huh.
And I was playing at that aforementioned Simpson Scene, which was down. It didn't used to be called Martin Luther King. It was called Hunter Street. And to give you an idea how rough that place was, the first time my dad took me down that way, we stopped outside of a pool hall, and a guy took a guy's hat and threw it in the gutter. Well, the next guy came out with a razor knife, and I'm like, there's no kumbaya back then, right?
Yeah.
So after hours, I can't believe this. I don't know if this is X-rated. I won't say anything weird, but I befriended gang leaders, which was good in this club. There was only 3 white people there ever. The light guy, the owner, would stick his head in, and me, uh, pimp, uh, old school pimp, right? So we would go down after that place closed, and there was a kind of a hippie underground. There was all this underground stuff going on 14th Street in the catacombs. So we walk into the catacombs and I see this band, two amazing guitar players, drummer. I was like, no, this ain't happening. This ain't happening. And then Bruce, and I mean, he never was a singer, but we used to call him a vocal expressionist. But I think at some point, Bruce was singing "Got a Mind to Give Up a Living." They were pretty much blues based, except for some of the crazy, some of the like they had a tune called "Agony," which was a guitar feature. And I just looked and I said, you know what, I should be with that band. Well, within 2 weeks, I get a phone call from Harold Kelly, who was the one who put that group together, and went and auditioned at the place. And of course, I'm listening to many different things. The first thing they noticed is when they tuned up, I turned the snares off. Now we're talking about, these are young kids, rock and roll blues players, but I've been playing with you don't leave the snares on when somebody's tuning, right?
Right.
So one thing led to another, and I became the group, got into the group. My father brought his friends from the factory down to hear us play. I'm like, Dad, you got to hear this band, man. Well, it didn't go over too well. He was totally embarrassed. I mean, we had a PA thing that had like all kinds of, not that by today's standards, nothing compared to like painted on it. And Bruce is like, vomit. And my dad's like, I'm going to take your drums away. You whatever, you're wasting your talent. That's two of the best guitar players I've ever heard. But what is that? It was like Lenny Bruce movie. There was some underground flick where a guy picked up a dog poo. I mean, for a guy from Philadelphia who got out of World War II at 21 and had his ship hit with 3 kamikazes, gave up drumming. He was expecting something more like Gene Krupa or, Benny Goodman. And he heard this out like stuff, modal, crazy, and all these hippies. And, they used to have light shows.
Yeah.
Yeah. So later, believe it or not, my dad's immortalized on the album. Old Bernie. I mean, I quit, joined back. I started playing with these rock bands or whatever you'd call them, glamour bands, and they went through some drummers. And then when I finally got back, that's when we went to Columbia Records and played the pop festival. And my dad and Bruce became kind of close, but he used to say, he sounds like he's got a cactus up his, what. And the guitar player he's a Shirley Temple, and I had to almost arrest my father to come to his own surprise birthday party. I'm like, my mom at the 12th gate. And of course, he didn't know, like, what the hell? He gets in there and we're like, he just sat in, doing it. It was great. So he's old Bernie. He worked at Foot and Davies, but it was initially pretty rough. I was living in a hotel, not just for that, but for other reasons.
Yeah.
Also when I was in high school. But yeah, so the Grease Band, I would say around 1968, I kind of met Bruce and the guys. Then there was and then I finally got back with them. And I think in 71, that's when we played the big pop festival and got our deal with Columbia. And yeah, I was the drummer till the end. So, and then I also played with Bruce in the late Bronze Age,
Okay.
which was a great band with rest in peace. All right. So Billy McPherson, Ricky Keller are all gone. Bruce, all gone. And myself. So.
Now, your approach in that band was pretty radical, as I understand it. I think you may have described it as all these high intensity musicians on one side and Bruce on the other. And there was a lot of spontaneity in the band. It's not a band like most Atlanta bands of the 70s and even early 80s. It's not a household name. It's known among Atlanta people, but for some reason, Atlanta bands, as good as they were, never made it to the mainstream a lot of the time.
Well, this was actually the Grease Band's internationally known. We played a reunion concert while Bruce was still alive, and people were coming from England and having it, and there was a reissue, and there's lately been a limited printing of another LP of it, which one of my students gave me. But we sold less records than Swami Satchidananda,
Yeah.
and we are in the famous unknown legends of rock and roll, stuff like that. But I called it music meets anti-music because contrary to popular belief, Bruce is not a genius. I basically frightened us. He was delivering cookies, blueprints, but we thought it was funny because he would come out and we had to train him to try to sing a little bit for the album. Um, so yeah, it was kind of like he would do, and we would always end with "Rock Around the Clock" or something that would get the crowd. But it wasn't like when he was with the Aquarium Rescue Unit, where he's up there holding a guitar and he's on stage and pretending he knows how to play, and people are going, "Oh my God, he's my mentor." No, he did his thing where it was time and disappeared, and it was the long jams. Then he'd come back, and at the end, we just ramp it up with Boney Maroney and songs like that.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was a unique chemistry that worked.
Right.
Five insane dudes, yes.
Yeah. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but there's you were in Atlanta at a very interesting time, and this city is a very strange town in that it's changed so much so fast that I don't think anybody. I'm 54 now, and even people my age have little conception of what the town was like in the 70s or the 60s. It was a very, very different city, and musically very interesting.
I came to Atlanta in 1966. That's the year the Atlanta Falcons started. They still haven't won a Super Bowl. I used to play in the Falcons band when Bartkowski was the quarterback and stuff back at old Fulton County Stadium, which I was also involved in the civil rights movement. Buttermilk Bottom used to be one of the most notorious slums in Atlanta. So it was actually next to Watts, the most notorious. So they raised that to the ground to put the stadium in. But like I said, you had the weirdness of the 60s, which was like, it's almost Australia's like that now. If you've got a concept, it doesn't matter what the instrument is, you're going to find somebody to play with you. It's that adventuresome spirit. So besides, the civil rights movement, like when I came down from Philadelphia to Thomasville, Georgia, which is where I went first, it was like, signs of, these black bucks want our white women, no niggers, Jews, queers, or Catholics, and hippies. Uh, I actually went to a Ku Klux Klan rally in Fort Lauderdale with a friend of mine. And we were like 14, 1964. Dude, it was like, I had to go out and these guys are doing their whole thing and wearing the outfits. And apparently some exec married a black woman. I don't know which the thing was, but they're mixing up the rights. Dude, they had crosses burning on Stone Mountain, So I come up here and I'm like, had already been working and interfacing with black people. I'm playing at black clubs. I remember when Martin Luther King was assassinated. Well, I tell you, I was trying to get volunteers. I was tutoring in Buttermilk Bottom and in a sociology class. And then when I said what I was doing, the kids that got to the front sat down. And I remember the teacher saying, and I was at the funeral and all. In fact, I'm in Life magazine. There's a big, like a fisheye thing, and you can see me walking with a priest friend of mine. So our headquarters was down the road from Ebenezer. Mm-hmm. But she was like, well, I think it's a shame when someone in United and gets shot in the streets. But when you compare, him to Jesus Christ, but I was like, well, who's a minister supposed to be compared to? So I was way out of touch with the mindset of my colleagues. But there were these things happening with the civil rights, when the hippie movement hit. Who told everybody around the country to grow their hair out? There was no there was no memo, right? It was like self-exploration. It became codified and marketed, to where you had people doing these drugs for fun and wearing fashions, right? But the original hippies, it's like, I forget who the guy who did LSD invented it. If you do it more than twice, you missed its message, right? It became, like many things, an indulgence, a thing, that's why I shaved my hair. I remember playing at the somewhere, and these girls came up, hey man, you want to buy some kind of drugs? And I had my aunt shave my head, thinking that I didn't want to identify with that, because we didn't do drugs in the band, only the one guitar player. Yeah. So when we played we played right before Led Zeppelin at the Pop Festival, the MC's like, God, man, what are you guys on? And we're like, yoga and vegetables. We were doing yoga and stuff. Also, there was Kundalini yoga in the park. It was a very fertile period. And then on the other side of town, there was all these like the Birdcage, Pascal's La Carousel, this the 11th Frame, all this hip jazz going on, bottom of the barrel, So yeah, it was a definitely different kind of vibe than, and I would say probably disco came out, even though I was part of the original disco, the only one in Atlanta. Then they got one on Peachtree Street. Then by the time the 80s, the first jazz festival I went to here, about $10 a day. Nina Simone, Dave Brubeck. I heard Miles Quintet, Thelonious Monk, Wes Montgomery.
Mhm.
Are you kidding me?
Right.
Then it became cool jazz. It's like when we played the Fillmore, Bill Graham was like, I want Janis Joplin, but now the record company wants me to buy a package in order to get Janis Joplin. He says, I'm dealing with a bunch of stockbrokers and day traders with long hair. No, I want who I want. So that's kind of what you get. It kind of got more and more fossilized, controlled, and monetized. But it was so magical. Money wasn't an option. It was just let's play our hearts out. There was an audience.
As an indication of just how much the 80s, late 80s wiped out Atlanta's collective memory of the 70s, I discovered in researching this article that you were present at a riot in Piedmont Park, which should be famous and should be part of our story. I doubt anybody my age even knew there was a famous deadly riot in Piedmont Park. And you were playing at that, weren't you?
Yes, and actually, Bill Fibbin, there's a picture of him. He got arrested. Bill was great, man. He was the guys. But yeah, we used to play with the Allman Brothers. They had music down in the park. And of course, there's another thing, the anti war movement. That was happening. I was marching in that. I was doing the civil rights stuff. I was tutoring kids. It was a Emmaus house. I was more conscious, I guess, because up north, you didn't interface with black people. They were the other side of the tracks. In the South, there's a history of it. Nannies. How. What I'm saying.
Yeah.
Mulattoes. Hey, how did that happen? But because they were slave owners, right?
Right.
Up north, it's like everything was cool till they came north, and it's like, yeah, they're all for emancipation till the jobs are threatened, right? So I never even talked to a black individual till I came south. And that was in the 5th grade in Thomasville, Georgia, where the Klan, we were Catholic, desecrated our church, St. Francis. I saw my first march of the Klan. Dude, yeah, I was like, I thought, and I was pretty close. It was going to be like Tom Sawyer. You had walked around with a straw hanging out your mouth and barefoot. That was my idea. But then, as I got further south and I saw all the racist stuff, which there wasn't even a word for that. It was just like there's them and there's us, right? And then when you get down, and then as it started to morph into the 60s, and you see, like, because I work with black people, and I'm like, wow, these are like human beings, man. It's like I had, intercourse with them, and I went, whoa, it opened my eyes. So how can you see the suffering? So yeah, there was a lot of consciousness happening, going on, with the yoga and the meditation. But that wasn't like a flash mob. That was just something that was in the air,
Yeah.
and that maybe it'll happen again, but I'm not sure it will. But it was pretty damn heavy, man. Glad I was a part of it.
Yeah.